Okay, I'll call this
Right here.
meeting
This
of
is that dead end.
City of Kerrville Planning and Zoning Commission to order at 4:31. Dorothy's not here today, so let me just do a roll call myself. Bob Waller here. Don Barnett.
Here.
Michael Siegerman.
Here.
Rustin Zuber.
Here.
David Jones.
Here.
Karen Harmon. Marty Leonard.
Here.
Okay, thank you. We have a quorum. Number one on visitor citizens forum, any person with business not scheduled on the agenda is encouraged to briefly speak to the commission. Please fill out the speaker request form and give it to the commission secretary prior to the meeting. The number of speakers will be limited at the first 10, and each speaker limited to 3 minutes. No formal action can be taken on these items as the Open Meetings Act requires formal action items be posted on an agenda no later than 72 hours before the meeting. If formal action is required, the items will be placed on an agenda for a formal meeting, future meeting. Number 2 is the consent agenda. All items below on the consent agenda are considered routine or ministerial in nature and will be enacted with one motion. There will be no separate discussion of items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item or items will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. Item 2A is approval of the minutes from the January 18th, 2018 meeting on page 2. I'll accept any changes or modifications you see. Otherwise, I'm open for
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, same sign. Passes 5-0. Number 3 on the agenda, consideration and action. 3A, consideration of a final plat action and a preliminary plat. Consideration and action concerning a preliminary plat of Riley Estates, subdivision containing approximately 1.22 acres of land out of the Samuel Wallace Survey, number 113, abstract number 347, in the city of Kerrville, Texas, and having frontage at 306 Meeker Lane. This is case number 2017-092. Sabina.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As was read, this is a preliminary plat, so the final plat will be coming before you again. So this is the first step in the platting process of this property. What has been presented to us is 9 new single-family lots with a private access easement to give access to the 9 lots. The property, the acreage is located on Meeker Road, and it is also, if you'll see on the west end there, it is where Burleson Road currently dead ends, intersects into the property. We do in our subdivision regulations have requirements for roads to be extended to and through the outer boundaries of properties, which occurred in the past where Burleson currently dead ends. However, if you'll see on the east end, not included in this property, there are 2 lots that had then afterward actually been subdivided and then approved for homes to be constructed on those 2 lots. So basically, for Burleson to be extended through the property, that was really decided many years ago when those other lots were platted. So this is a remaining acreage that has been discussed several times throughout the past few months with the city staff and with the Development Review Committee. We did have several technical edits that we requested, and as I mentioned, there is a private access easement that is going to be providing access to the 9 lots. That will also be a public utility easement and a fire lane as well. The private road is going to be gated at both ends, so it will remain private and will not be constructed such that it's going to resemble a street. So we have in the past sometimes talked about private roads versus private access easements and what the difference is there. And the request today is not for a private street, it is for a private access easement and a connection driveway basically to access those 9 lots.
Okay, one question. I have 2 quick questions. So this easement will not be up to city standards, just going to be a paved?
It is basically a private driveway.
Okay.
To access those lots. The property is zoned RC, as is mentioned in your staff report, which is a cluster residential development. It does lend itself, that zoning classification, the whole purpose is for properties that are not as easy to develop, either because of topography or because of a situation like this where the property has been hemmed in by previous approvals and is a remainder tract. So it does grant some flexibility in the zoning district itself, and that's why you have a little bit smaller minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet versus the 6,000 square feet. That zoning district would allow for other types of residential uses other than single family. What is before you, though, is a plat for single family homes and on single family lots. I mention that because the RC, if it were any other kind of housing that is being requested, would have to come through the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council for approval of those uses with a plan that shows access and how those lots are laid out. Similar to what you're seeing, however, the use of the single family is by default approved. But the RC with a different type of housing product could have driveways that provide access to 4 lots at a time. So if you look at it that way, you basically have 9 lots where you have 1 lot that would access off of Meeker, and then 4 lots accessing from one direction on that private drive, and 4 lots accessing from the other direction, if you follow me in that.
No fire code problems with that easement?
Fire has looked at this, and we did have a formal review of it in December, and worked out the technical requirements to make sure that they have access and that they can turn around and access the property.
They can do that? Okay.
Go ahead, excuse me.
So what you're saying is you're going to have 2 entrance points, one from Burleson, one from Meeker. They're going to be gated. You will not be able to come in on Meeker and go out on Burleson. Is that what you're saying? 4 lots will have access from one entrance and 5 lots will have access from another?
Well, the way that I'm trying to describe it, if I can get my mouse working here. So basically, the RC district would allow, under a mixed housing, which is not what's being requested tonight, but it is a way of looking at it and analyzing the road, the driveway. And essentially, say for example, townhomes were to be requested in here, which is not what's before you, but up to 4 lots could have a private drive that provides access for each of those units. And that's why I'm trying to break it down. But the road will be continuous through there. So if you access the gate here at this point and wanted to drive through the property and exit this gate, you could.
Okay.
And
So the
fire
reason-
can as well.
The reason it's gated is to keep it from being a through street?
Yeah, it's private. It's private.
The applicant is here tonight and can explain what the reasoning is for for the private street, for the private drive and for it to be gated.
Okay.
So in essence, the fire department can go in one side, or the police department, or the rescue trucks can go in one and go out the other if they had to.
Yes.
The other question I had, staff recommends approval with the condition.
Yes, I apologize for that. Yes, let me get to that last slide here. So when we looked at this at the Development Review Committee level, we did have some discussion, but we need to continue with that discussion as far as the making sure that the pavement can withstand the weight of the fire truck, but also to make sure that it is designed such that we can have access to our utilities, because we will have a combination of a driveway, a utility easement, and a fire lane at the same time, to make sure that there are just some technical discussions that remain there that we'll have to have before the final plat comes back to you.
Water and sewer will go in on this private street.
That's my understanding, yes.
Will it be curbed?
I don't believe that they want to curb at this time, but those are all discussions that still need to be had before the final plot comes back to you.
And so all we're being asked to do is approve the easement layout, basically,
Well, the entire preliminary plat, so that
and the way the houses are situated.
yes, the layout and the
The
alignment,
lots.
yes.
You have no concerns about future use? If you grant it, either talking about townhomes or something else that's not what's on this plat right here in the future?
Well, the plat would need to comply with whatever the proposed development is going to be. The proposed development is single-family, as far as we know. Now, if that changes tomorrow, which it can, then the property would likely have to be replatted, which would mean that and since it's RC, and if it is anything but single-family, it would have to come to the use itself would have to come through the commission and the city council.
Okay.
Okay, do I have anybody wishing to speak? It's not a public hearing, but I think what we're being asked to do is fairly clear. Any questions from the commission?
The issue of the gates, that's not part of this, that's just for our information.
Yes.
Would that be a requirement later? In other words, I'm just saying, if they didn't do the gates at all, would that ever be a requirement?
No, sir.
Of the DRC or the final plat?
That is just what's being proposed, and
Okay.
that's my understanding.
Okay.
Right, but if tomorrow they change their mind and did not want to gate, then there is no requirement that they gate.
Right, okay, that's what I was asking.
Who has responsibility for the maintenance of the pavement?
They would in perpetuity. It would be,
They as being the homeowner association or?
yes, sir.
Does this require a homeowners association? Nine single-family homes in a cluster on private property? Or
In-
private,
Not by code,
okay.
but certainly it would be a good idea.
Is the developer here?
I am. Yes, there will be a homeowners association.
Okay. And it'll be spelled out in your homeowners association, the responsibility for the maintenance of the road?
Quite clearly.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I mean, can be a big issue.
Yes, sir.
Now, that's not part of what the city would require, correct? Julian?
Well, I would recommend it to make it clear that there be a note on the plat to that effect.
Okay, I think that's a good idea.
Well, that brings up the whole next set of requirements in terms of street lighting. I mean, does it have to meet city code to,
It's private.
for a private drive?
It's a private drive.
Any lights? I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm looking for my engineer. I'm not certain of if it were a public street, how that would compare, but with it being a private drive, there is no requirement for any lighting.
Is there any plans for street lighting?
Not at this time.
Okay.
I guess so. In essence, if you build this road as an easement and you put up no gates, you can go from you can stay on Burleson, go all the way to Meeker. And so you're providing that access, but you're not being required to put it in up to city road standards.
I mean, my assumption would be that there is no allowance for public access on this private street. This would be specifically for the people that live there, correct?
Correct.
The
I'm
public
David
doesn't have
Watterson,
access to it.
3900 Bandera Highway, Kerrville. Yes, it is a throughway, but we do not want the neighborhoods to have access through this and turn it into a
Shortcut.
a shortcut. So that is why the developer has decided that he wants to gate it. It's going to be a very nice development that's really going to improve that area of town. And we're developing homes that are affordable, which is greatly needed right now.
Absolutely.
So he wants to have some park light areas in our development. So the possibility of having some lighting does exist. It's not in the plan at the moment, but he's all about park settings and walking areas and benches and that kind of stuff. So it's really an upgrade for the Meeker area.
But if you don't put some kind of gate in there, it's going to be a shortcut.
Yes, sir, and that's exactly why we want to do that.
I would assume that your customers are going to want a gate in there too. The people that are going to buy these houses.
Yes, sir. So, yeah, the people that buy the houses, they'll obviously have gate. The fire department has already given us very clear instruction on how the roads need to be constructed to handle the weight of their trucks. They will also have I forget what it's called, Lee, but there's a special access through the gates that they require, which they will have, and so, of course, for the fire department too.
Are these lots large enough to have their own parking space, not park on the through street, or will they be able to park on their lot?
They'll be able to park on their lot and in a garage or
Okay,
carport.
they're big enough for that.
Yes, sir.
Because the houses up on Burleson are more smaller and some park on the street.
Correct. Most of these homes will be two-story.
Oh, they will.
Yes, sir.
So these are going to be bigger homes that are up on Burleson.
That is correct.
Okay.
David, thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you.
Any other comments? If not, I'll accept a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept preliminary plat as presented.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, same sign. Passes 5-0. Okay, we go to number 4, which are discussion items. 4A, discussion concerning a text amendment to the zoning ordinance creating a conditional use permit option for parking lots. Sabina?
Thank you. Yes, the impetus for this discussion item, you'll probably remember, was that came up at your last meeting where we talked about that currently we do not have a tool in our zoning ordinance to allow for a path for a conditional use permit to be requested. We discussed that in conjunction with a rezoning case. However, in thinking about this, there have been several times where that would have been a useful tool to have. Where we do have in our parking regulations, we have a minimum requirement, not a maximum, and a lot of times, and it is based on use. So, for instance, if you were to develop a fairly small lot for retail use and then wanted to come back later and put a restaurant in there, you might have a parking deficit. So you may have an issue meeting code, but even if you do meet the code, then sometimes you need more parking anyway, which was the case in the rezoning case that came before you last time, just as an example. So, so we did, at the tail end of that case, we did talk about creating that conditional use permit path forward. It would also give you the benefit, the ability to look at a proposal itself and not look at the larger, which under what I call a standard zoning classification, you'd have to look at the worst case scenario under that zoning, the uses, but also bulk, height, and parking, and all of that. With a conditional use permit, you've seen before, you get to attach a plan, and you get to start to look at screening and landscaping, setbacks, and possibly even negotiate additional conditions that would make that use compatible with the area where otherwise it might not be. So for that reason, we've brought this item forward to you. We would, in your staff report, I put the entire conditional use permit process in there so that you can see what an applicant would have to provide to you in terms of information before we'd bring it forward to you for it to even discuss.
So you've written this in the context of any zoning area can apply for a conditional use permit for parking directly, not just in the residential transit area, which was the one that didn't have a provision for that.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, that is certainly an option that you can discuss. This item is on here just as a discussion item anyway.
Okay.
There's no action that's being requested of you this evening. There are other options, and one of them is to go through the use table and identify certain zoning districts where you might want to have that tool and leave others out. The way that this is worded, it would be in any zoning district, so that we have some areas where, for instance, back in the past, I don't think that really has been the practice so much lately, but back in the past, all property came in as R1. And unless there was a specific use that a developer had for that property, it probably still is R1 from many years ago. So rather than having to rezone and then apply for a conditional use permit and go through the process twice, that's sort of the thought process there for some of those instances. Certainly, in an R1 in the middle of a neighborhood, you probably never want to consider a commercial parking lot, but that would be up to you in the future.
If you for some reason.
Or you could say all non-residential zones.
Well, this is residential transit.
Yeah, this is a residential, it's
This
RT.
is where we got into
transition.
conflict.
Right, but I'm just saying that'd be a way to.
You could do that too. We could look at that. There are a lot of hybrid zoning classifications that are not just residential or just commercial, the RT being one of them.
So basically, what you provided is existing conditional use permits. There's nothing been put in here yet to add parking lots. Would it be as simple as adding parking lots under conditional uses permitted in any zone?
Oops, yeah, let me get
I
back
thought
to
it
that.
said parking lots.
No, I don't.
It does not currently. It would be under the
That's what
Article
we're talking
11.113D. There's a list in that section of
Yeah.
about 4 or 5 uses, most of them utility, if not all
Right.
utility uses. This would be
So we could
added.
add number 5, parking lots.
Yes. And that's our recommendation, is that we add that and then advertise it and bring it back to you as a next step.
And those would be commercial.
Yeah, my feeling is you do it in the why, if you do it in residential,
Oh,
then
no.
people are gonna hear that the planning and zoning allows parking lots in residential areas, so.
No,
I don't see ever a need to add it in residential
Needs
lots.
to be just commercial, probably.
Okay.
No, you're missing this whole idea, the residential transit area. I mean, that's the language.
Well, you could include
would eliminate that.
transitional.
You have to include that in that particular area. Even though it may end up being rezoned because of the new planning situation.
Well, but what D does, this says any zone. So apparently we
Any
could,
zone, which refers to what they're referring to, is that residential needs to be taken as an exception. But then we get back to residential transit, which is residential. It's a residential zone. Is that correct?
I consider it a hybrid because both, if you own a house, you could either live in it or you could put a business in it, a limited business.
but it is an existing zone right now,
What,
RT.
Yes, it's
It's
available and it's on the ground.
and it's the one that's not either commercial or residential, but you got that one to deal with. And my thoughts on that were, in the RT zones, they put all the parking in the back. That's the purpose of that zone, and I don't see how a parking lot fits with the whole idea of the RT district. So to me, that would go with the residential, but that's just some thoughts.
Right. Well, right now, the thought process is to give you the tool, the possibility, but it would not tie your hands in the future to deny a conditional use permit, nor would it hamper you in adding conditions.
Yeah, you have to look at this with conditional use are always individual case-by-case basis. And so it gives you the tool to either yes or no it every time it comes up.
Still requires a notice to the adjacent property owners,
Yeah.
a public hearing, correct?
Yes, and it requires a plan to be attached.
Okay.
Which I think is very useful for us, particularly in this particular offering last week or whenever we met. The objection was changing the zoning, was not the parking, as I recall.
Right, and the parking layout was not even shown to you because there is no mechanism in a standard zoning request for us
To see
to
it.
enforce that.
Well, there was no request for parking. They did
They
not
couldn't do
come
it.
to us with a request for parking. They came to us with a request to change the zoning to the heaviest commercial zoning we have on Sidney Baker for this property.
Because that was the only option available to them.
Now,
Yeah.
I had some conversation with a couple of people that told me that have residential transitional property and that they could put parking in the rear of that property. Is that not true? Rustin, what you were saying, if you have a business in a residential transitional area and you're operating out of your house, a business, you are allowed to put parking behind your house.
Correct. Yes, but parking in and of itself is not a permitted use.
Okay,
Parking associated with a permitted use is,
correct.
but parking in and of itself, a parking lot, like an all right parking lot, is actually not even addressed in the zoning code at all. And,
Yeah, no, my thoughts were that the purpose of putting the parking in the back is so you don't see the vehicles.
Right, and again, in this particular
Right.
situation, if I'm understanding this properly, the owner of the property can go back there behind on the backside of that lot and put a parking lot.
if it's associated with a use that's permitted in that zoning district, which is RT.
Okay.
Well, they already have what we were talking about last time we met was a specific request, but it wasn't on the property that's zoned commercial. It was on an adjacent piece behind it that the property owner owns as well, that he wanted to be able to put additional parking back there to service the businesses on his commercial property. And there was nothing we could do because we didn't want to change the zoning on that tract to meet the N1, I believe it was.
Right. As far as I'm concerned, if you have 100 acres, and you put a permitted use on that 100 acres, and that use is permitted, then whatever is, and the entire tract is zoned for that use, then yes, you can put parking on that is associated with that use. But it is still, the entire use then is that commercial use. So with the parking lot being a commercial use that's associated with an N21, which is the zoning on the adjacent property that was being requested to expand, to me, it's an expansion of the N21 use.
Right. So hypothetically, Bruce, if you were given a conditional use permit to put a parking lot on the backside of your property connecting to your existing, with an easement to get through there, so the people that are using your shopping center on Sidney Baker, so you wanted to have all employees parking back, make more room for your customers in front, would that solve your issue? Would that?
That's the idea, is to get the tenants and their employees out of the way of the commercial.
So it's not so much of the zoning you were requesting, it was just to make use for parking?
The only reason that it came to you as zoning is because there was
No other way.
tool within the basket to do it any other
Okay.
way.
So we could solve your issue, if we had the ability to give you a conditional use permit, we could solve that problem for you.
Right.
Yeah, that's the whole, that's the
Absolutely.
reasoning behind us having this discussion.
Great.
Without changing the RT zoning, only doing a conditional use permit on that existing RT zone.
Right, and the item that's on your agenda tonight is just discussion on whether to create the tool.
Right.
The request isn't before you yet.
No, we were just trying to
Okay.
use some examples of what we're talking about.
Mike, do you have any thoughts on this, as far as the language?
Oh, no, I haven't even gotten that far yet. It would be a relatively simple fix if you all want to move forward with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do we need to do?
So all you're asking for in this discussion is to ask you to go back and draw up the language that would permit that?
Yes, and then we'll notify in the newspaper and get it before you under a public hearing.
Okay.
Just the text amendment at this point.
And that you don't need an action motion on that, just some direction.
Just a head nod.
Any other specific direction y'all would have?
Just that I don't see the need of it in the residential for sure, and possibly not in RT. But in commercial, don't have a problem with it.
And this is something, if something like this came back, and to use Mr. Motherall's property as an example, came back to us, we can go in and set limitations and certain requirements on that piece of ground that we grant a conditional use permit for, up to including screening, fencing,
Access.
only a portion of that property,
Access as well.
whatever.
Yes, I would say all of that.
Okay. Okay, is that enough direction then
I think so.
from us?
We want it.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sabine.
4B, discussion as well, discussion concerning pending ordinance amendment to address right-of-way design standards, wireless telecommunication network node design manual. Sabina?
Okay, this is actually Drew's item, but he is out with the flu, so. But we've had numerous discussions on this Senate bill that was approved, that went through last year, last legislative session. We knew it was coming, so we had some internal discussions as well on how to get ready for it coming through. And so we started having discussions with you in the fall last year. So this is just a continuation of making sure that our local regulations, that we're ready to address these. And if you'll recall, really for the most part, you'd seen a lot of photos ranging from really large wireless telecommunication facilities, the towers, down to very small nodes. this one is basically what this bill did was it told the cities that that we are to allow these network nodes that are boosters, if you will, that we have to allow them within our rights of way and on our own facilities as well that are in the rights of way on city poles. So so we wanted to be sure that we were ready for this. The first item that came before you and you recommended was that because there are certain areas that we are allowed to be pretty hands-on still, and that is in our design and or historic districts. We do not have any historic districts per se, but we do have those 3 districts that we said were tantamount to design districts, but they weren't spelled out specifically in the ordinance. So we brought forward a text amendment to you that would clarify that these are indeed design districts, and those being the Guadalupe River, the Gateway, and the CBD. Have the Guadalupe River on there twice. So the next step basically is that we would move forward, and this is a discussion item tonight because now we're out of the zoning ordinance. So we did what we needed to do in the zoning ordinance, but now there are 2 other things that we need to do at the staff level and then move that through the city council as well. And that is basically to create those reasonable design standards to include the concealment requirements, and you'll see also, if you've read it, then you've seen that there's also some camouflage language in there, that we limit the location of, and remember that some of these can be attached to poles, but some of these can also be their own poles, that they're not located in residential areas nor adjacent to the residential areas, and we can also limit them and keep them outside of our city parks or the boundary of our parks. So that is the manual that is before you. So basically we've had, like I said, a couple of workshops with you. You did go forward, and the city council did this month get those design districts done. And so the next thing that is not before you this evening yet, that is also coming at the hopefully about the same time, if not right afterward, is a right-of-way management ordinance that we do not have today on the books, that is referenced in the pages that are before you, but we don't have them in place today. So to be really ready for these, if and when they come our way, that we know how to properly address them to make sure that they don't interfere with traffic and other utility provisions, that we have other services that we provide as a city. So we'll need to dovetail those together as well. We wanted to bring this before you really more as information. These you might look familiar to you. These 2, this one and this one, those are examples of what has already gone up in Fredericksburg. So tonight we just wanted to get your input into what's in front of you. There are, I think on page 28 and then on page 35 would probably be the 2 areas that would be of most interest to you. Those are the areas that we wanted to be sure that we address through what you've already done and talked about. And that's all I have for you. We'll just take any input forward that you have.
So when you designate these districts that we're interested in protecting, does that leave leeway in the future if the city decides to, some of the area comes up that they want to designate as protected from these nodes? Is it still possible?
Well, you have, and the city council has already clarified that those 3 zoning districts are design districts. In this design manual, it references back, so all of these 3 things are going to be interwoven and cross-reference each other. And basically, so if and when this goes forward and gets adopted, this design manual by the city council, then it references design district. Now it actually specifically lists these. We'd probably have to go back and clarify and list whatever new district that might be to put in
But there
here.
is a possibility to do that.
Yes.
Okay.
These devices, are they majority private enterprise? Are they mixed? Are they all?
My understanding is that they're completely private providers.
Okay. So they'll have requirements of distances and coverage and line of sight and things like that? And they'll be required to present a mapping that shows where their perfect world of devices would be?
I believe what you're referencing is an older, our existing wireless telecommunication facilities ordinance does have, and that will stay in place because we still have regulations in place today that we're not looking at changing, that has to do with those major facilities, the towers.
Okay.
And that those have, that they prove if they're closer to one another than is in our ordinance, if they're closer than would be permitted, that they would have to prove why they have to be closer to one another. These really address the smaller facilities, those network nodes.
Right.
And the pole, there is a separation between the poles, and I believe it's
Well, no,
300 feet
these
from one
appear to
another.
be devices that will be attached to existing utility poles or service poles that are already in place.
for the most part, but it would also have, there is also provision in here in this design manual for the poles themselves, for new poles themselves. So the
Okay.
provider could put their own pole, its own pole
Okay.
in the city right of way.
Okay.
Except for these design districts, or we would, what, is that, we have some veto power over those. Then the right of ways, what you're saying is they can do that if they need to.
Well, this says they have to be a minimum of 300 feet from any utility pole or other node support pole to minimize the hazard of poles adjacent to roadways and to minimize effect on property values and aesthetics in the area.
So
That's if they want to put a new pole
a
up.
new pole.
Right. Well, they're not going to want to do that if they can,
Right.
you know,
They
go the other
don't want
way.
to put them up either. They can get coverage.
Right, for the concealment and camouflage restrictions, those are specific to these 3 design districts, but there's more in here that would apply to other network nodes, whether or not they're within these 3 districts. It really depends on what section you're looking at as far as what applies where. But what we can, and this proposes that we will, be more restrictive in these 3 design districts.
Right.
Bill default?
Now, one of the things that I did get a chance to talk with Drew, and he even suggested that if you're not ready for this to move on, if you'd like to wait for him to be back, you could do that as well. There's no huge rush for this, but we did want to go ahead and bring this forward since it was ready, and a good continuation of what we've already talked about. But we're not under any huge time crunch that we know of.
Well, just based on the length of this and the detail, I'd say my preference would be to give us time to review, make notes, and maybe put this on as a discussion item in the future.
We can do that.
Here.
Is that sound
Agreeable.
okay?
Sounds good.
Any preference on time? You think our next meeting, depending on what's on that agenda, if that would give us time to review this? So I'd say we could plan on having it as a discussion item again at our next meeting.
Is there any particular additional information that you can identify at this time that you might want to see?
I don't think until I have a chance to read it pretty thoroughly. Because there are going to be a lot of cross-references, as you said.
Right, some of which exist, some of which don't yet exist.
Right. You're going to, and we'll add some more. That would be my thought then. Okay, staff report.
I have nothing to add. We have nothing queued up for your next meeting, speaking of which. But we do have a couple of weeks to determine as we get applications in. But at this time, we don't have any business in for your next meeting.
Would you recommend we did this as a standalone discussion if we didn't have anything else?
If you like, we can do
Just to
that.
keep it moving forward.
Certainly, we can do that.
Is everybody kind of in
Sure, that's fine.
agreement
Yeah,
with that?
that's right.
Sure.
And so if you can go ahead and set that as a discussion item
Sure.
for the next meeting. Any other business to come before this commission today? If not, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
So move.
Have a motion, to have a second? Second. All in favor, raise your right hand. 5-0, thank you. Close meeting 5:18.